and I am going to turn the chat off. So I am Tracy. I'm the lead consulting and learning librarian. And I get the pleasure of leading the first webinar in our human resources series. And I'm going to be talking about hiring today. And Colette is kindly helping me because I have to confess, I am not very good at giving a presentation and monitoring chat, but please do feel free to post any questions or comments as we are going along. I will try to remember to pause and see if there are any questions. As always, and I promise, put the chat up here. I just love to know about the experience of the people attending the webinar, because we do have some veterans in the room, so to speak. But whether it's as a supervisor or as an employee, I'm curious about your experience with the hiring process, like what you found interesting about it and what was challenging. And so I'm just going to go ahead and pull up the chat for this one, if you want to just enter into chat anything about your experience. I particularly am interested in any challenges because I want to make sure that I really do talk about those in today's webinar. So anyone brave enough to share about your experience in the hiring process, whether as a candidate or as a supervisor? And I know it takes time to type in the chat, so I'm giving people a little bit of time, although maybe I should have said you should get some extra coffee. Creating interview questions that covered all aspects of the library. As a job seeker, I have recently been surprised at the lack of contact at interviews to let job seekers know the outcome. Oh, that's a great point. Follow up. I have interviewed several people in the past 4 years. The new system we have puts a lot of process on our shoulders, so I have many more hoops to get through. Being frustrated with old interview questions. Those are really good ones. And I am going to spend some time talking about interviewing in particular. So many different things. Oh, how interesting. One potential hire who told us he came to the interview because he'd never been to the town before. Yeah, it is very interesting to see what brings people to apply for a job. All right, some good responses. So thank you for participating. What we're going to cover today is I'm going to talk a little bit about laws to be aware of when you're hiring, and then talking about identifying what you need. And we're actually going to spend quite a bit of time on this one because that might help for those of you who struggled with the interview questions. Really thinking about what you need in a position can make that process easier. And we'll talk a little bit about the process and paperwork and the interviews, and then kind of the wrap up, the references and final steps. One thing I want to acknowledge right away is the fact that we have so many different types of libraries in Montana. And some of you may have really great support from your local governments. Most libraries in Montana, public libraries, are associated with a city or a county. And some of you have great support and maybe have someone who will help you through the process. Others of you may not. You may actually be doing this all on your own. And so I completely want to acknowledge that. And please take what seems useful to you. But I understand that not all of this may be doable for you, other than, of course, you definitely want to stay on the right side of the law. And so we're just going to talk briefly about this. There are workshops that will cover these key laws. And if you are at all interested in attending one of those, please just feel free to email me or call me, and I will connect you with some organizations in Montana who do provide training on these topics. I wanted to touch on them more to raise your awareness of them. And we have an information sheet that we can share with you and that will be available through MSL Learn. But first, there are three resources that I wanted to highlight. The first is the US Department of Labor's employer.gov. This is kind of the go-to for rules and regulations regarding employment. The US Department of Labor's Career One Stop is actually more of a best practices. So it has some really great hiring and recruitment guides, including some information about artificial intelligence and AI that I think might be really interesting to you if you are in the situation of hiring. And then the third resource on the screen is the Montana Department of Labor and Industries website for employers in Montana. And this is going to focus on Montana specific rules and regulations. So while many of these, in fact, all of them really focus on private employers, and certainly for those of us who work in the government world, the laws apply to us as well. So some key laws to be aware of when you are hiring, Montana minimum wage law. Montana has a higher minimum wage than the federal minimum wage. And so the Montana Department of Labor and Industry will have the latest numbers for you so that you make sure that when you list a position, you are certainly complying with that law. The Equal Employment Opportunity Employer, or you might see the acronym EEOE, is the law that has to do with hiring and protected classes. So you cannot use age, gender, race, and several other key characteristics of people to make a decision on whether or not you will offer that job. So at the federal level, for instance, if you have two people applying for a position at the library and one is in their 20s and one is in their 50s, you cannot use their age to decide to hire one or the other of them, actually. And in Montana, all ages are covered. So in the federal level, it's anyone over 40 is protected, but in Montana, all ages are protected. I have not heard of any Montana employers using genetic information to make a hiring decision. However, this is a federal law. So the Genetic Information Non-Discrimination Act, or GINA, says you cannot use any genetic information or health information about a person to make a hiring decision or even a training decision. And then the Americans with Disabilities Act covers all people with disabilities. And it's, of course, about creating equal opportunities for them to use services and find employment and so forth. In the hiring phase, it tends to come into play in that if you have an applicant with a disability and they request a reasonable accommodation that does not create undue hardship for your library, then you will need to comply with that. And then finally, the Fair Labor Standards Act. This one comes into play in determining classification for your employees. So if you have a position, this is the law that determines whether or not they're exempt or non-exempt. And exempt would be they can work overtime and they may not necessarily be compensated for it. If they're non-exempt, if they work overtime, they will need to be compensated. So all of these laws come into play when it comes to hiring employees. And one of the things I would kind of share is, if at all possible, I recommend using and modeling your process after your local government's work. And the reason that I say this is I know that here in Montana, the Montana Association of Counties and the Montana League of Cities and Towns, they offer a lot of training for your local government officials that have to do HR work. And so they are trying their best to support your local governments in making sure they stay on the right side of the law. And so that's why I really recommend that libraries actually use the process of their local government when possible. You know, your value add is really in determining what the library needs and finding the right person for the job. So when possible, and it may not be possible, I do recommend that you at least model your process after your local government's process. I'm just going to pause there, take a breath, and just see if there are any questions before we jump into talking about what I think of as the fun stuff. Yeah, Jennifer, you really want to stay away from asking about a disability. That's the American with Disabilities Act is one I would say I do recommend taking a workshop about managing employees. And it does tend to come into play more in the whole overall process of managing an employee, but there is that component with hiring. Any other questions? Okay. So you will see this again, because I think it's always kind of helpful to tell you where we're going to go with the rest of this session and then summarize for you. But when you're looking at hiring, best practice is to start out with clearly identifying what you need, and then using that information to make sure that the job description for that position is accurate. And then also using that information to create a job announcement, to advertise, and to recruit. And so when you think about hiring, it's sort of like the first phase is you're identifying what you need. The second phase is you're recruiting. And then the third phase is you're screening for the right candidate. And then the final phase is you're offering them the job. And so we're going to touch on each of these, although I'm going to spend more time on the identifying needs and skills and the interviews piece of this. But please do jump in if you have any questions or even recommendations for your peers in the other areas. So when you have a vacant position, if you have the luxury, it's a really good time to think about whether or not you want to hire the exact same position or you want to do something different. Maybe things have changed at your library or in your community. And maybe at one time you needed a position that really focused on children and youth. And now you have this need for focusing on older adults. A vacant position is a great time to make that change. Now, you may not have that luxury. And if you do not have that luxury because you really need this position and you need it pretty much as is, I still strongly recommend answering the next two questions. These questions were taught to me in a training I went to for managers, and I have used them and found them very helpful for really being clear about what's needed. And one of the challenges is, the interview questions and how you really cover the full scope of what the library does. That is hard. But what's even more important is to make sure that you cover the most critical duties of the position and you try to figure out whether or not that person has the skills, the knowledge, and the characteristics they need to be successful in that position. So the first question, how does this position contribute to the library's mission? Identify the top 3 to 5 things. What this is really about is basically, if you think about this position, what are their most important duties? So for example, if I'm hiring a children's librarian, then I would say their top 3 most important duties are definitely story time and programming for children, managing the collection for children, and probably doing outreach in school with schools and daycares. So those would be my top 3 things I would pick for that position. And so then I go into the next question, which is, well, what skills, knowledge, and or characteristics does a person need to make those contributions? And I would say they definitely need to love working with children. And I would prefer it if they had experience working with children, and even better if they had knowledge of children's development and how children learn how to read. So that's how you use these 2 questions together. And what I've found in my own work and when I have been hiring is these questions really help me clarify what is absolutely most important and what is nice to have, and what skills or knowledge people need to have to be successful in that job. And then I can use that information for the rest of the process. We're actually going to practice with this, but really quickly, I want to talk about involving other people in the process. Hiring is one of those areas where if you can include at least one other person in the process, it can be very helpful. All of us have personal preferences about who we hire and who we work with, and we have blind spots. And so having at least a second set of eyes and maybe even a third person really helps you address those blind spots and perhaps see different perspectives on a position. And so when you are at this stage of the game or even throughout the whole process, if appropriate, you might want to ask other staff members in the library what they think the top 3 to 5 things are and why, and then what skills or knowledge might be needed. It may not be appropriate. If this is a position your other staff would be interested in, then you don't want to ask them. But if it's a position that none of them are interested in, getting their feedback helps you get that insight of people working on the front line. If maybe you're a very small staff or you're a library that's basically you and one very part-time person, you may want to consider asking the board, your library board for help, or your board chair, or even your local government officials. If you have a good relationship with your city or your county, that can be very helpful for just thinking through what the library really needs and thinking through this position. So that is one other piece of advice I would share. So let's practice, because I really do think practice helps make these concepts more real and more doable. So what we need, and we're all the hiring committee, all of us on this webinar, is basically we need a front desk person. And when I say front desk person, I'm thinking of that person who's frontline. They're the ones checking in and checking out the materials. They're the ones helping people find things in the library. They're often the ones helping people with the computers. Basically, they're our customer service person. And so using chat, what are the top 3 to 5 most important things a front desk person does for a library? Answers reference questions. Okay. Customer service skills, basic technology troubleshooting. First contact with patron, answers the phones. Greets patrons, keeps an eye on activity in the area, computer tasks. So a lot of customer service work, kind of just managing people coming in and out of the library sort of thing. They represent the library, the way they present themselves and how they deal with patrons and other staff. Yep. Multitasking. Now we're getting into skills and characteristics. Yeah, that's a great one. In fact, why don't we shift a little bit to when you see this list that you have given me with the customer service and the technology questions and answering questions and representing the library, how does them doing these duties help patrons and customers, other staff, and the library director? And I ask that because it actually will help you with the final question. So how does this person doing all the things you put in chat, how does that make things better for patrons or customers of the library? Let's start with that one. They know where to go and who to talk to. So the patrons get that information. They feel welcomed and comfortable. Yeah. Anything else? Good experience, they come back. Not good experience, we lose patrons. Exactly. They free up other staff to do other things. Yes. Makes patrons feel at ease to use the library, helps other staff by setting a good tone at the start of the visit. So there's this recognition that this person really makes a difference with the patron's experience and whether or not they enjoy using the library and will come back. So let's touch on, if you have a good front desk person, how do they help the other staff in the library? Like, why does that make a difference? And maybe even the director. Let's include them too. So if they're doing these things, how does that help the director and other library staff? If they're helping the patrons, if they're answering questions, if they're solving, they're the center that keeps the cogs moving. It's a pretty critical piece of the puzzle. If they are a positive person and provide excellent customer service, the director doesn't have to intervene as often if there are problems. Yes, Abby. And that goes back to that front desk person freeing up other staff to do some of the other things as well. Anything else before we shift to that last question? They are basically the bartender. They're there to hear everything and help people out whenever they can. Yes, that is very true. So based on everything you've typed in chat, what skills, knowledge, and or characteristics does this person need? So if you think about your ideal Abby's front desk person who has excellent customer service skills, like what skills, knowledge, and or characteristics does this person need to be successful? They need to be approachable and friendly. What do they need to know? Like what kind of knowledge do you need to have? You need to be familiar with all departments of the library, knowledgeable of their position, outgoing, good listener, customer service skills. Need to know the collection and how to find items patrons want. Welcoming, efficient, overall background in library duties. Okay. Anything else? And we're actually going to come back to these later on when we work on the interview questions. Need to know what other staff do so they can refer appropriately. Yes, definitely. Right. Thank you. I always think it's helpful to actually practice. So if you go through this work of identifying these needs and these skills, what do you actually do with the information? Well, the first step is update the job profile or the job description. I've seen both terms used interchangeably. But one thing it's critical to make sure of is that the job description matches what this person is going to be doing. It's very easy for us to let those job descriptions or job profiles lapse, and they're a bit old and they don't really reflect what people do. But you really want to make sure when you're in the hiring process that you update those. It's actually also good practice to kind of look at those every couple of years or so to just make sure that they're truly reflecting what people are doing. But it's very important when you're hiring someone because this is information you are sharing with them about what's expected of them. And so make sure that that job description clearly lists those top 3 to 5 duties that you listed, that they're working with people, that they're helping answer questions, that they're helping people find things. You want to make that clear that that is their most important duties. And then you also want to make sure that that job description reflects those knowledge and skills and characteristics. And what you might find, and is a next step that you were sort of beginning to do in the chat, is that there are certain knowledge and skills that you're like, this person absolutely has to have this. And then there are probably knowledge and skills that you're willing to train the right person to do. Like, for instance, you had mentioned so much knowledge about the library. And is that an absolute must-have? Or is it actually more important that they have those customer service people skills and you're willing to teach the library part if you find the right candidate? And so that's what those questions have helped me do when I've been in the hiring process, is get clear on the priorities and what's I absolutely must have this and what is this would be nice to have. Once you've got the updated job description, use your needs and skills to create a job announcement. And I share this because it actually helps candidates who are looking for a job make a decision. Some people will just apply for a job because they need a job. But there are a fair number of candidates who will read a job announcement and they will self-select out if they can tell that they are not the right person for the job. And that makes your job easier, because then you are not looking at candidates who aren't going to be a very good fit for the job. The other reason why I recommend using what you've created to create the job announcement is, I think people have stereotypes about libraries. And so if you just create a generic job announcement, like we're looking for a front desk person, and you work with the public and help them find things, people are bringing their view of the library and their stereotypes about the library when they review that job announcement. But if your job announcement makes it clear that they really are going to be listening to people, that they are going to actually be helping people, that they need to be good at multitasking, that there will be lots of interruptions, that can help people say, you know what, this is not the position for me. And win-win in this hiring process is very much that the person you hire wants to be at the library and you want them there. And so you are building a process where you're trying to give everybody the knowledge and the opportunity to do what's the right thing for them. Once you create that job announcement, then you have what you need to advertise. And you hopefully know what works in your community, whether it's that you're posting it on a job board, or maybe you use Indeed or other things like that, or you just use word of mouth. Whatever works for you in your community to get the word out and let people know about this. And then you're going to next use this information to begin preparing for the interviews. So I'm just going to pause here because I gave a lot of information there and just see if there are any questions. And yes, people do think we read all day. And yet, I think all of you did a really good job of pointing out that the front desk person is definitely not going to be reading all day. All right. So I want to take a moment to talk about the culture of your library. And every organization has a culture. Some organizations are very laid back, very free flowing. Some organizations are more hierarchical. So there's an actual process. To kind of relate this to our front desk person, if your library is really laid back, maybe you just want the front desk person to take care of the issues. But if your organization is more hierarchical and the front desk person runs into a situation where they would need to make an exception in a library policy, if your culture is such that you want them to come get permission first, that's actually something that's very important to know. And so I shared these questions just because they can be very powerful for helping you identify what will make a candidate successful in your organization. Not necessarily to use these as the main priority. The main priority when you're looking for someone is their ability to do the job and do the job well. What's helpful about these questions is that they can be helpful in determining and deciding upon which candidate to hire. They can also be really helpful for communicating to the candidate about the culture of your library. And so when you communicate to that information to them, that helps them make the right decision about whether or not they should be there. Again, I wouldn't say you use these as the final decider. This is just to help you become aware of what your culture is like and to use that information to give the candidate a good picture of your library and what to expect. The other thing that's really valuable about doing this is it can actually help you. Like, let's say that you have a candidate who maybe you are a more formal library, and this candidate is much more of a free spirit, but they're a front desk person and you can see how they will do a great job. Knowing this about your culture and knowing their preferences allows you to meet them, which makes for a much more successful, I would say, employment experience for everyone. So this actually is almost as much for you as it is for any candidates. And then that final question, what characteristics do you, and this is for those of you who are supervisors, what characteristics do you find easy to work with and which ones are challenging? This is very important for revealing your preferences. And that is really helpful just for understanding, like if you have a candidate that you're working with and you maybe are struggling with them, but everybody else, maybe that's helping you with the hiring process, loves them. Sometimes the answer lies in this question. And it's just that you have a preference, because we all do, for who you want to work with. Again, this must be tied to the job. So what you want to think about is the position you are hiring, what that position needs to know and be able to do, and then you recognize your own preferences, both to identify and overcome any bias you may have in hiring and to be clear on which candidate you are picking. And then if you do pick a candidate that has the skills you need, but you recognize that they might be challenging to work with, it's a place where you need to work with them as a boss in meeting them part way. So these are, I freely admit, challenging questions to answer, but they're also very powerful for just being clear about what it's like to work in the library and what you as a boss tend to prefer. And again, they can be helpful if you're in the lucky position of really having a tough decision and needing to decide who to hire for a position. All right, so we're going to practice again. And, oh, yes, yep, those questions are very important for thinking about changing the organizational culture. I would agree with that. And I'm not going into it in this session, but organizational culture really makes a difference too in your employees' experience and in retention, and also recruitment. So let's go back and we're going to use our organizational culture questions to be able to begin crafting interview questions. So we have a wide range of libraries here, but just what characteristics make people successful at your library? Just kind of think about it. Like, are they more successful if they're independent types and they solve problems on their own? Are they more successful if they recognize policy and procedure and they kind of follow along with that? This is a hard question, but what characteristics are going to be most successful at your library? Or at a friend's library, right? Ability to think outside the box, to bring new ideas forward, to think of others. Driven, passionate, can work alone and as a team. Yeah. Self-starter, welcoming. Anything else? Following procedures, but being willing to question the need for exceptions. Yeah, nice. Okay, here comes the hard part. What types of interview questions might you ask to find out if this person has those characteristics? So basically, what kinds of interview questions could you ask to find out if this person is going to be a good fit, if they're going to enjoy working at your library? Are you comfortable working alone or with a team? Situational questions to see their reactions. What are your strengths? What's a weakness? Tell us about a time when you developed a new service or program. A really helpful question when you're working with interview questions, open-ended is very powerful. With this one thing that can be a really great question is describe your ideal work environment. Another thing, getting back to the do they follow policy is, tell us about a time that you solved a problem. How did you go about solving the problem? Answering that question can reveal whether or not they're a self-starter. It can also reveal whether or not they are someone who would go look at a policy. Like if they answer it, well, I just solved it and I asked for forgiveness, that tells you a little bit about that person. But if they say, I went and looked at the policies and then I thought about the particular circumstance and I needed to make a decision. So I went ahead and made the decision, but then I followed up with my boss to let them know. That tells you that that's a person who probably respects that hierarchy and they are also comfortable making exceptions when needed. And thank you, Kole, for sharing the behavioral interview questions. So, what types of interview questions might you ask to find out if the candidate has the skills we talked about? So, you said you need your front desk person to be good at customer service. They need to be able to answer questions. They need to make the library welcoming. They need to help people solve problems. What are some questions you could ask to see if they have the skills you need? You also said that they need to know about the library. So what are some interview questions you could ask for that one? There's definitely the tell us about a time when you developed a new service or program, but what other questions could you ask to find out if they're good at customer service, if they know about libraries, if they enjoy helping people? This is the hardest part. Okay, thank you, Kole. Tell us about a challenging patron interaction and how you handled it. Perfect. Do they have customer service experience? How would you deal with an angry patron who wants help immediately, but the people who can help are unavailable? That's a great one. Tell us of how you have coordinated with other staff in the library to help a patron. That's good for revealing their ability to do teamwork. Describe the job you're applying for. That's a good one. Tells you if they did their homework. What don't you like about working with the public? Oh, that's a really good one, Abby. Some of these answers are interesting and telling in how they handle difficult patrons. What skills do they have that would help them succeed in the position? And the other piece I would add to some of these and is the question why. Like what skills do they have that would help them succeed in the position? And why do they think those skills would help them? Because that can reveal their understanding of exactly what they are getting into. All right. Any final thoughts? And by the way, if any of you are hiring for a front desk person, you can save this chat so that you have some questions to use in your next interview. All right. So after you have gone through the recruitment process, and I do highly recommend creating interview questions before you even get to the interviews. I think that having all of this prep work lined out allows you to focus on the people applying for the job. Um, Hiring is one of those areas where preparation really does pay off. So the first question to think about, will you be doing this alone? And if not, who will help you? And do you want them to help you throughout the entire process? That's really important to think about right at the beginning. I think a lot of you are pretty small, so you might be doing this on your own. But if you do have someone willing to help you, I encourage you to let them help you from the beginning. This next one may not be applicable for all of you, but it's really helpful to have a screening tool or some way that you will decide who you are going to interview. What tends to get us in trouble when it comes to hiring and interviewing is if we are inconsistent in our practice. And so creating a screening tool helps us be a little more objective and consistent in deciding who we're going to interview. And so, for instance, at the state library, our screening tool is simply a spreadsheet, and it just has the applicants' names, and then it has those top 3 to 5 most important things. You can do pass fail, but we typically find we need to use a numeric rating system. And so, for instance, if we had a front desk person, for instance, in customer service experience was critically important, maybe I'm going to give it 3 points. And if I have 3 applicants and one of them perhaps has worked in retail and one of them has no experience and one of them has worked on a library front desk, I'm probably going to give a 3 to the library front desk person and a 2 to the retail person, and then just a 1 to the person who really doesn't have any experience. What happens when you do that is as you go across your most important contributions, it seems to do a pretty decent job of raising the applicants you should interview to the top. So I do recommend a screening tool, but like I said, it may not be applicable in your case, but you do need to be clear about how you are going to decide who to interview. This next one probably doesn't apply to a ton of you. I find most of you are going to be interviewing in person, but sometimes we have board members on these webinars, and a director position is a position where I have seen libraries use like Zoom for the first interview and then bring people into the library in person. If you do bring people into the library in person, build in time for them to meet others and to hang out at the library. This is part of helping them sense the culture of your library. So often we bring them in, we ask them the questions, and maybe we let them meet some staff, but then they're on their way. Give them time to see what a library is like. Some of you may get candidates who have experience with libraries. I work with a lot of small libraries in Montana, and so their candidates don't always have experience with the library. They may bring those stereotypes that you've talked about, like people just read, or it's really quiet, or there's no stress in the job. So allowing them to see the library and experience it for a brief bit of time allows them to have a sense of what they are getting into with this job. And as challenging as that might feel for you, you're better off if people can tell what they're getting into. You're going to have a lot less heartache and headache if, again, you can get to that place where they want to be there and you want them to be working at the library. The next point is, you might want to consider adding a practical component. This is something that I have experienced as a candidate and I have done as a supervisor. And it's very effective at seeing whether or not people can do the most critical parts of the job. So for instance, if they're going to do story time at the library, ask them to read a story and acknowledge that it's a little weird with adults, but, just say this is going to be a big part of your job. We want you to get a sense of what it would be like, and we just, want to see how it goes. Or if they're going to be shelving books, ask them to actually shelve some books and see how they do. That practical component really can let you see what their skills are. And it also gives them information about what the job really involves. And then finally, I want to talk just a little bit about artificial intelligence or AI. If you are someone who maybe does not enjoy writing, there's nothing wrong with using AI to help you generate the job announcements. Now, this is entirely a personal decision, or it may be a policy decision. Some of you on this call might actually be in libraries where you have policies about using AI. AI can be very useful for writing a job announcement. The thing is, what you put in really determines the quality of what you get out. And so if you just put into AI, write me a job announcement for a front desk person, you might get a fairly generic job announcement. But if you put into AI, write me a front desk job announcement for someone who has great customer service skills, loves working with people, is friendly and outgoing, and understands that helping customers is the most important part of their job, you're going to probably get better results. So, feel free to use it, but be smart about how you use it and definitely give it the human once over to make sure that it's accurate and it makes sense. And if you don't want to use it, that's okay. But I will say that you do have the potential of seeing AI generated materials these days. My last interview that I helped screen, I actually saw AI generated materials, and I really appreciate it. The candidate said, I used these AI tools to generate my resume and my cover letter. But they also said I certainly gave it the human touch to make sure that it reflected my experiences. I actually appreciated the honesty. You may see AI generated stuff. And so think about your reaction to that. Think about how you feel about that, whether or not you're okay with that. The other thing is you literally could get an application from somebody who's not a real person. It's kind of interesting. There are sometimes some AI bots. And so there's that piece of it as well, as if hiring was not hard enough, right? So these are just some things to think about. And again, that US Department of Labor Career One Stop kind of touches on AI. I suspect we could probably do an entire workshop about it. But I did want to mention it because it is now becoming a part of our process and something we need to be aware of. So I will just pause here to see if there are any questions. So we've got some advice using a panel for interviews. Our interviews are held in the library with a panel of 3. Great. Any questions about the screening or interviewing process? It is one of the trickiest ones. I just want to make sure. Or any observations? Has anyone, because I sense we have quite a bit of experience, has anyone come across the use of AI materials in their applicants? Oh, we've gotten some applicants that were working through some type of service that was applying for them through AI. So we tried to set up interviews and they didn't know what the job was. That is a little awkward, isn't it? Right. Okay. So when you are in the interview process, so now we're shifting into actual interviewing and the next steps, you're like nearing the end of the hiring process. So you're going to select candidates using your very fair and consistent process. You're going to schedule interviews with them and you're going to welcome them because you definitely they are interviewing you in addition to you interviewing them. Just a brief word about the interviews. You do want to ask everyone the same interview questions. It is okay to answer different follow-up questions. People have different skills. So if you are following up to ask a clarifying question, you do not have to ask that exact same follow-up question of every candidate. But you do need to ask the same questions of everyone. I highly recommend a little debrief process after each interview, whether it's, if you're doing this alone, whether it's you just jot down some notes about that particular candidate's strengths and weaknesses, or you touch base with your panel. You just want to make sure you have a debrief process. And I think after each interview is nice because then you're focused on that candidate. If you wait till the very end, it can be a little tricky to just remember some of the key things that you wanted to capture. So give yourself a little space in between interviews. And I recommend this to just be able to capture your thoughts, but also if you're doing back-to-back interviews, the experience that the last candidate has is not going to be the same as the first candidate because you are a human being and you get tired. So give yourself space if you can. And I realize that's not always possible, but that's better for you and the candidates. Just briefly, some people like to share interview questions. In fact, I'd be curious for those of you who've hired, do you share the interview questions with the candidate before, like either an hour before or the day before? There's differing thoughts on this. Some people recognize that we all process differently. And so they are sharing the interview questions so that people get a sense of what you're going to ask and so people can do their best. Others have found that when they share the interview questions, the person just reads their answers. So this is a decision that you can make. You can share interview questions or not. Sometimes the position might determine whether or not you want to share them beforehand. One practice I do recommend is that you give the applicant or the candidate a copy of the questions while you're interviewing them, because that allows the candidate to kind of read it while you might be reading it, and that helps with processing. So I see that there are some chats. So let me just see what people had to say about sharing interview questions. Oh, so that's a yes. We do not. We used to, but found that people are using AI. Oh, no, I'd be concerned they would use AI to come up with the right answer. No. Yeah, these are all good answers. Oh, um, you're actually supposed to, I would say, not just only, I would stay in the same order when asking interview questions. Because that keeps the process consistent. And that's one thing. You really want to make sure that you keep it consistent. No, we don't. I prefer them not planning what is the right thing to say, but have to think on their feet. It feels more honest. Yeah. The reason why some people recommend sharing interview questions is just kind of the recognition that different people process differently. And so it levels the playing field. Yes, Kale, consistency is key and your documentation isn't disjointed. Yeah. So when you have the interview questions, I would ask them in the exact same order every time. And of course, ask the exact same interview questions. It's just the follow-up that might be different. And follow-up is to clarify when you think of it that way. All right. So the consensus in this group is, nope, we definitely don't share the interview questions. I'm curious, do you give them a copy of the interview questions during the interview? Like not sharing them beforehand, but just while you're interviewing them, do you give them? Nope. Okay. Yes. All right. Yes. Okay. This one's more mixed. Yes. Yes, we also have complicated interview questions at the state library, and it does help. It really does. Okay. So a few more yeses on sharing them beforehand. So one thing I want to say um, is don't hire if there isn't a good candidate. And I realize that this is not easy to do. Sometimes you are a small library and you desperately need someone. But if there is truly no good candidate, you are setting yourself in the library up for some pretty serious headaches and heartaches. I mean, if you hire and there isn't a good candidate, sometimes the best case scenario is they leave pretty quickly and then you're right back where you were. Worst case scenario is they take the job, you realize it's not going to work, and you have to coach them out of the job. And that is not a fun experience. So if at all possible, don't hire. If it's in the middle, if it's not clear, then you can go back to those skills and characteristics that you identified and kind of name what it is the candidates are missing, and then make sure you work on that. So if you have someone who's kind of in the middle, like maybe they don't have a lot of customer service experience, but they are friendly and outgoing, then like work on making sure they have training in customer service and how to manage difficult patrons. Um, if you do have a good candidate, if you are lucky enough to do that, then you're going to proceed to the reference process. So you're going to be calling their references. And these days, it is not uncommon for the people you call to just say, I can confirm they worked here these dates, and that's it. And so you have to rely on the tone of their voice. Are they friendly? Are they open? Are they really closed and short? And, you can also search the internet. There are many ways now that you can actually get more information about a candidate if there's some kind of red flag that begins to come up for you. But let's say you've got your good candidate, the references are good, then what you're going to proceed to is the job offer. And so this is generally, you call them on the phone, and then you want to follow up with some written paperwork that kind of outlines pay and also when they're going to start and welcomes them as well. All right. So I will just leave this up here. This is kind of what we talked about. Basically, we went through the process of identifying the needs and the skills, use that to update the job description, to create a job announcement. And then you enter into recruitment mode. Then you have to look at all those applications, screen them, do interviews, and then call references and make the job offer. There is no doubt that the hiring process is pretty involved. And so I do understand why sometimes people are like, oh, this is good enough, but I just definitely encourage you to be patient if at all possible, and you have that luxury. So let me just see what came up in the chat. Yep, just having a body doesn't help. And then Colette was posting the evaluation. So, and then I did hire someone rather quickly. It didn't end up working well at my location. However, they are still employed at another branch. Sometimes that happens. Do we have to take this again through MSL Learn to get credit? And Colette can kind of talk about that a little bit. We'll talk about that one. One reference I talked to offered the information they would not rehire. Yes. Sometimes the people who give us references do give us clues. So with that, I will just say briefly, and then I'm going to actually let Colette talk about the credit process. Kara is going to be leading our next session about onboarding. So this is when you've hired. And then I will be back on August 25th to talk about feedback, which is kind of the main part of performance management. And then Corey's going to wrap this series up for us by leading the session about what to do when an employee leaves. All of these sessions are from 11 to noon. They are going to be recorded and they are going to be placed into MSL Learn. You can self-enroll, but all we need is for you to complete the evaluation to get your credit because they are eligible for credits. And definitely reach out to Kara, Corey, or myself if you have questions, because this was a lot of information to cover. And with that, I might actually turn it over to Colette to wrap us up.
Thanks so much, Tracy. We'll make this brief. The information is in the chat about what you need to do to get credit. But because this is the first webinar that we are launching in our new certification program scheme that we have, just to let you know that, we love it that everybody's here learning together, and you can always just, come back to the recording in the YouTube channel when it's posted later today. And definitely share that with staff members or other people that you would like to have the same opportunity to learn. The information sheet that we created, I've linked in the chat a couple of times. It's also available with the event in our Aspen calendar. So that's always linked there, and you'll be able to find that. But for those of you who are tracking credits, again, this is our first webinar. It is approved for credit by our State Library Commission. And what you'll do is when I create the course later today, or probably maybe even tomorrow morning, you'll enroll in the course, basically complete the evaluation, and then the credit will be tracked in MSL Learn. So don't hesitate to reach out if you have more questions about that. And I guess there will be this lag time between finishing today and then actually creating the course and getting the recording posted. So bear with us on that. We'll learn a lot through this first experience with our new system.
Well, thank you, everyone. And if you have time and want to give us feedback in the evaluation link that Colette shared, please feel free. I can hang out for a few more minutes, but you are certainly free to go. And Colette, if you want to kind of stop the recording in case anyone has any questions, I will stop sharing.
Sounds great. Thanks.